All right, good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming to our panel. When we first started talking about presenting here at GDC, Cockroach Labs as a company, this is our first time coming to this conference. But we have been kind of entrenched in several different gaming companies for really quite some time. And so when we started thinking about coming here, we're like, well, how can we do this and do this effectively when we're just a database company? And I guess saying just a database company is a little bit of an understatement. I mean, we do have something that's pretty interesting, definitely for people who are building out infrastructure and thinking about deploying games, either locally or globally, honestly. So we really thought about doing this. We look to our customers always first to say, how are people doing these things the right way? I've had lots of conversations with Dan Goodman, who's sitting to my immediate left, about this. And the way that they think about their infrastructure and the way they think about scale and the way they think about easing these sort of things. So I think this is one of those things. It's kind of, well, it's not easy to build a game, but it's kind of one of these things. It's like building the game is one thing, making it work for your customers is a wholly other thing. And then, by working with, the team at AWS, especially the game tech team, we have learned a whole lot about the challenges that a lot of organizations have around kind of building these things out. And like I said, really around making them kind of production grade and reliable, because ultimately, we understand that if you lose a gamer, well, that person may not come back because they're up on another game. And making sure that these systems are reliable and you can actually capture as much as you possibly can across the TAM that's all over the planet, such a big deal. And so when we thought about doing a panel, us giving a talk, not right, but coming up with some expertise. And so that's what this is all about today. That's what we wanted to do. This session is somewhat intermediate. I say that because every time I have a conversation with Dan Goodman, I go into like ranges of data and cardinality of queries. And so like Dan's gonna probably get a little pretty deep technical. But Dan Carpenter and I are probably gonna stay up above the 10,000. I like to get a little technical. So we'll try to keep it a little bit of a mix between all different things. So welcome everybody. My name is Jim Walker. I am the principal product evangelist at Cockroach Labs. I've been with the company for 3.5 years, but we're originally exposed to CockroachDB about 5 years ago when I was at a company called CoreOS. And if you're familiar with CoreOS, they kind of help and drive the whole Kubernetes thing in distributed systems. I'm an advocate and a believer in distributed systems. I really believe that is the way in which we scale, not just the size of our implementations or the volume of them, but really how we gain geographic scale. And so, I knew I was going to join this company a long time ago. And I'm just kind of delighted to be up here talking about, real customers doing stuff with this stuff. And so I'm from Cockroach Labs, and that's my Twitter handle. Dan, do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are as well?
Sure. I'm Dan Goodman. I'm the CTO and Co-Founder at Ultimate Tournament. We make the Ultimate Arcade that you may have heard about from earlier days. Like Jim mentioned, I'm an absolute database nerd, so excuse me if I get into a little too technical. But basically, what we're building is we're building a platform for, and I'll dive more into it, but we're building a platform for game developers where they can focus on just building their game, and they don't have to worry about dealing with all of the infrastructure management and thinking about how to do things like player connection management and reducing their latency by moving their servers around. We want to take all that away and make it so that game developers can just focus on developing their games.
And I'm Dan Carpenter, and I run the North American games business for AWS, and Dan Goodman actually took the words right out of my mouth in the sense that, we're trying to make building, running, and growing some of the best games in the world on top of AWS easy for developers. And what that looks like on our side is we obviously have 200 plus different services that we make available as primitives to nearly, that can be accessed by anyone within the space, but we're also in the process of developing a number of first-party game tech services, of which a number are going to be announced at our keynote at 10:30, shameless plug, a little later today, which I think will be pretty exciting and hopefully more approachable for many of the folks in this room. And then we're also trying to work with partners like Cockroach, in addition to other consulting partners in the space, to build package solutions which folks will be able to pull off the shelf with a CloudFormation template and build right into your game as well. So a lot of new developments coming on that side, and thanks for taking the time to attend today.
Cool, thanks guys. So it's Dan, and you guys, I kind of want to share a microphone, so I'm just going to do it this way. I hate to be up here, and I like to be a member of the people. So it's Dan and Jim. It's pretty easy to remember Dan and Dan. But I'll have to be very clear in what I ask. So Dan Goodman, I met you and we were talking about Ultimate Tournament, and it's kind of esports and e-betting and all this stuff, right? But recently you all jumped into kind of Ultimate Arcade as well. Can you just explain what you're building, right? Because there's two sides of what y'all are doing, right? So can you just explain those two things?
Absolutely. So we originally started with a platform we call esports.
I don't think you're on.
Am I on?
I don't know. Is that microphone on, please?
Maybe. Oh, I can hear it come out of one. So we built a platform called the Esports Book, which is basically we wanted to make the Robinhood for esports betting. And a lot of the challenges beyond just actually building that platform, we're dealing with state licensing, regulation across all the different countries and states that we want to operate in. And beyond just that, there's also a very large amount of time that goes between these esports events. And we wanted to be able to offer our users something between these games, because they happen a lot during tournaments, and then it's like nothing for maybe a few months. So we figured, how could we make something that is really engaging to these users, but still gives them that let's risk money to make money feel that you get from the gaming experience, gaming in terms of gambling. So we came up with the idea is what if we could turn those really fun games like Slither.io, Agar.io, the very simple ones, what if we could put money in those so that, like an arcade, you place money down to play a session, but when you defeat someone else, you actually take their money. And then you can keep doing that, and you keep taking money, and then you can leave with actually more money than you entered with. And that's been very much our focus in building what we call the Ultimate Arcade. We're now expanding the arcade as a third-party developer platform where any developer who wants to monetize their game in this new model where it's not an upfront cost, it's not a battle pass, you don't have to worry about designing your game around selling in-game items, you don't have to bombard your players with ads. We want to make a new model where you can take pretty much any game that works in a multiplayer setting and you can monetize it such that you can focus on just building your game, like I mentioned before, and we're going to take care of all the infrastructure stuff, player connection management, player profiles. You don't have to worry about all those complex systems. You can just focus on building your game so that you can join this ecosystem of all the games that we're building as well, to introduce this new monetization model to developers, generally in the indie range, that may not otherwise have been able to recognize game development as a sustainable source of income. We just wanted to give a platform for developers to focus on making games, whether they're doing it as a side project or they want to make it their career, and they can do it just focusing on their games.
And this was all launched, last Friday?
Yeah.
Right? Ultimate Arcade was launched last Friday, right? In fact, I put Ultimate Arcade up here on the first slide, and I had to ask Dan before the event, is that even a thing yet, right? So
Yeah.
You guys launched on Friday, and how successful so far?
Surprisingly, I don't think we had any tangible expectations, no numbers that we expected to hit, because it was just so new what we were doing. But we've been really happy with the results so far. The retention and how quickly it's catching fire within the content creator community, specifically with streamers that would normally stream table games or slots. They're really loving it because it's such a perfect platform to play with your audience. That's the biggest thing we found from content creators is they can jump into a game and then all their viewers can jump into a game with them in real time and try to take their money on stream. And they can see their usernames on the streamer's feed, and they can see each other killing each other and getting money. And there's some of the clips that we've posted to TikTok and Twitter from these content creators playing with their viewers are just it shows how powerful this new way to deliver games is, and we're just really excited to see how that scales as we add more games.
Awesome. Well, I'm horrible at games personally. I'm NES version 1 or whatever. I like 2 buttons. I can't have 15 things going on in my hand. So I won't jump in and make a bunch of money off that, off the other players in the game. But that's what's happening, right? People are jumping in and just making money off of each other right now in Ultimate Arcade, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Ultimate Arcade was built off of Ultimate Tournament. Is that correct, Dan? Right?
Yeah.
So And tournament is really more of like the platform side of things to help people just get going really fast, right?
Yeah, we've always wanted to build products that allow people to just get from 0 to 99 to 100 in just an absurdly short amount of time. Esportsbook was designed to be a white label esports book where operators within the United States could just license it and instantly offer a proven esports betting platform to their customers in like weeks, as long as they have the license. And that's kind of the same thing that we're doing with the Arcade third-party platform, where we're saying we're taking a very Steam-like approach, or the App Store model, where we're saying we're going to help you deliver this game, and the financialization is a little different with taking money on the defeats, but we wanted to basically build a platform where there can be different types of games on the platform, and people can build communities around the arcade.
Right. And we'll talk more about some of the challenges that you all had to solve, but I mean, there's not simple challenges when you're building out a platform like that. But there's a lot that AWS does to help you as well. So Dan Carpenter, without getting into the keynote, dude, what is the role of AWS game tech in the context of something like this?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that we hear from a lot of folks that are first getting started with launching a game with us is the challenges that they face in actually scaling the game initially, but also going through the QA and testing process. And so, one of the things that we've been really focused on from a game server perspective is both making first-party game servers available just on native EC2, but also using services like GameLift, which present a managed front-end solution for deployment of those servers globally in 20-plus different regions. But in addition to that, though, there comes the context of player data, in-game data, testing data, et cetera, that need to be stored and is also resilient across locations. And so, with a lot of folks like Dan Goodman, we have conversations on that end of what can I actually do to store and have this available at the edge and ready for consumption, within the game itself. And so in addition to traditional game servers, we're also spending a lot of time on what our edge computing workloads look like bringing Lambda to the edge from a serverless perspective. Also bringing in, especially within the real money gaming space, one of the things that we're focused on is our Outpost and local zone solutions, which basically is a rack that one can install within a local facility, which connects directly back to AWS. And as I mentioned too, some of the things we'll be launching later are packaged versions of existing AWS solutions that make things like leaderboards more accessible, matchmaking, and then in-game telemetry analytics also really accessible. So from our perspective, there's a long road ahead from a game standpoint, and all of it's coming from developer feedback like Dan, and one of the things I'm also hoping to get from folks over the course of this conference is what you need to see from AWS as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the same experience that we've had as well, right? Like as a database provider, what's the role of a database in the context of a game? Well, is it serving up things? Is it all the transactions that are happening in the background across the entire planet? If two people are fighting over the same inventory within a game and two people buy it and you only had one item left, that's a problem. And so for us, it's inventory management, it's transactions, it's the payments inside a game, making sure that's real time. You don't have to come out of a game to actually buy something, do it inside, right? And that sort of thing, but do it at global scale. And so for us, we love working with AWS because there's just tons of people who actually are using that to do this sort of scale, right? Because I want to talk about scale today, but more explicitly working within the game model. So that's the kind of the three of us with the various different solutions. So Dan and you and I sat yesterday on over right on this floor at the end of the hallway. We drank a lot of coffee and we had a lot of conversations. And we're talking about some of the challenges around gaming. What do you feel are kind of like the biggest challenges you all want to solve, or just kind of in general, just to game platforms?
Yeah, so I think probably everyone can agree. Maybe there will be some controversial opinions, but the biggest factor of a good multiplayer experience is latency. Latency is like, if you have players with high latency, it's a nightmare. So focusing on getting that latency down as far as possible for your different players is really important. And then I also think just being able to scale really reactively. We all know about these really big game launches that just, the amount of players that want to play on launch just end up being a DDoS attack. So being able to handle those influxes in traffic when a big streamer tweets something about a previously unknown game, when there's a launch, just being able to react really quickly to that change in traffic. And ensure that it doesn't affect, existing players, just keeping the latency down. I think those are probably the two biggest challenges when it comes to a multiplayer experience.
Yeah, so latency is a big ball of wax that we could unravel here, Dan. So when you start to think about latency, like in-game latency and those sort of things, What are the top 3 things you think are the focus areas for people to actually look at, right? Because it's a problem, right? And it's difficult to actually solve.
Yeah, I think one is just getting everything as close to your players as possible. The less distance things have to travel.
Speed of light,
Yeah,
dude.
I mean,
It's a physics problem.
yeah. Just reduce the amount of distance it has to travel, but also simplifying the operations that you have to perform when something is required to be synchronous. You don't want people waiting for these really long transactions or waiting for some event source pipeline to fully complete before you can get them to that next UI. Get them to that, notification that they defeated a player. You want to make that as fast as possible. So just focusing on just reducing the amount of stuff you have to do. And then also, kind of in the same vein, just reducing the amount of moving parts. So let's not have 60 microservices talking to each other for a Slither-like game. Let's just have a few. Let's have the game server and let's have matchmaking, and then let's have whatever system is moving, in our case, moving money between the slips when players are defeating each other. Just keeping things really simple, because the less stuff you have, the less opportunity for error.
So simplicity is a development problem.
Yeah.
Right? The operations and managing that complexity is an ops problem. And then there's this latency about putting things close to people, right? And it sounds easy, I know we'll talk about database and that sort of stuff. Like, what are the key things from the compute side of actually making sure that things are close to users?
Yeah, it's just having access to a lot of different regions and really fast compute.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest.
Yeah, and
thing.
Dan Carpenter, you guys, that's exactly what you all are doing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I touched on it a little bit with our Outpost and local zone solutions, but one of the things we're also thinking about as well is not only having a server closer to the end consumer. I mean, we have a lot, depending if you're in an FPS versus an MMO or a real money gaming game, I think that latency tolerance is a lot different. We have a lot of customers that say to us their tolerance is between 7 to 5 milliseconds or less. They need, and so it's important for us not only have the server there, but we're also exploring a lot of opportunities within the server itself in terms of memory sharding on the server. How can we have shared processes on it? Looking at the underlying binary architecture, one of the things that we're also building is a lot of custom silicon in moving toward our Graviton chips and our inferential chips from a machine learning perspective, which we've found can increase density of the server itself in addition to bringing the server closer to the end consumer. So we're hoping from a simplicity standpoint, it also requires less servers for people to manage and hopefully introducing some layers on top of that for users to have a better way to deploy based on some set of parameters, whether it is memory allocation, server type, location, player density, et cetera. Those are things we're hoping to bring to the fold here in the near future.
Yeah.
And from an AWS point of view, Dan, how do y'all think about it? Like, is it just basically just regional coverage and then the massive biggest servers you could possibly get? And is that what you're talking to customers about? Because I mean, look, at game tech is a different game, right? Like I'm sorry, I just said game tech's a different game. It is a wholly different conversation, right? And so how separate is that from kind of everything else that's going on at AWS, just kind of the general population?
Well, I think it's super important for us from a proximity perspective, and the fact that it does require a lot of heavy lifting for us to actually go construct a data center facility in a given location. And our present coverage in the US is okay right now. But for example, we haven't sped up the speed of light yet. We're working on that as well. But even transversing.
Let me know when you guys figure that one out.
Even transversing from Dallas to Ohio, across a network can introduce some latency that we don't need, and we don't have a location in Dallas today, for example. So we're solving that with a number of big customers by using a local zone concept of having smaller nodes in terms of like a spider web or matrix across the US relative to our bigger regions, where then folks are backhauling to do things like data storage, large analytics, a core database, or potentially a shard of one, within the central region, where we may not have all of our services available in a local zone. It still solves a lot of that concept of latency.
Well, it seems like it's a market shift, I think, in the AWS kind of strategy over the past 2 years, where to get really focused on a vertical and say, how do we actually help them figure that out? And it's not just an investment in hardware, but it's an investment in a technical investment as well from the game tech team, right? Like to actually go and really rethink some of this stuff, right?
Yeah,
So.
and folks will probably see over the next couple of months what we're really focused on from a service delivery perspective is, as I said at the start of the conversation, our kind of building, running, and growing framework and how we can introduce new services within each of those pillars. Another area we're really focused on too is the actual construction of a game using both cloud-based desktops and artist workstations, which then will play into hopefully easier live operations via those same terminals. So more to come on that end, but I think the database aspect is something where we're also trying to dial in on what is the most important for games customers, because the different types of databases and the underlying functions are so broad that we need to bring to bear better kind of packaged solutions, I think, for the end user. And again, some of them have a preference for vendors like Cockroach, where you've had tremendous success in the game space, and we want to highlight that too.
Yeah, yeah. So let's shift away from the physical infrastructure, because I think the physical to me is like number one here. That latency thing, you're never going to be the speed of light. And by the way, if you ever do, guys, figure that out. I would love to be there for that, because that would be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
But we are running in, I think, in modern software engineering, we're running into these limits of the physical limits of our world, right? And I think it's right. It's no joke when Ohio and Dallas seems pretty close, but like actually the speed of light is a big deal when you're going back and forth a bunch of times. We deal with it all the time. We deal with somebody has like a financial transaction happening in New York and one happening in Sydney at the same time. Who wins, right? Like, okay, if I'm going to do a database transactions going back and forth 5 times, that could be like 2 or 3 seconds. And think about what that means, like from a financial services point of view. In a game, forget it. Like that like any sort of jitter, they're gone, right? And I think that's why I think this vertical to me is like, seriously, the problem you all are solving is some of the most interesting, I think, challenges on the planet. So, but I think the software engineering side has actually done that, and I think the hardware is getting better, Dan, as well. And I'm like that's awesome. Let's talk a little bit more about simplification from a development point of view, Dan. Like, so when you start to say, yeah, it's one thing to get up here and say, yeah, simplify what you're developing and bring it down from 60 microservices to 5 or 10. What are the big components that you all think about when you think about like the software architecture, what you all are building, that would help people kind of understand like, okay, how do I simplify this so I can actually be much more efficient from a development point of view?
The biggest thing that I like to say is, and I'm sure everyone's heard this a million times, don't reinvent the wheel. A lot of the problems that we have in the gaming space have been solved in other industries. For example, distributed consistent databases. Like, we can lean really hard on the database for making sure that our data is consistent across the entire globe, and not have to worry about building really complex event source pipelines and just nightmare with 6 stages and multiple microservices involved. We can just be like, hey, transaction.
Right.
Like, let the professionals do the things that they do best, and let's build the things that no one else has done. And let's use the right tools for the right job, and like let's not try to make things that we don't need to make if they already exist. I mean, it's the same reason why everyone's moving to the cloud. I mean, we don't need to stand up our data centers. Like, there are professionals that are doing that really well. So let's use those services. And yes, it's going to cost a little bit more money than if we were running everything perfectly.
But ultimately,
ourselves.
it doesn't cost more money, right? Because you're actually saving
the
and you're
TCO.
efficient.
It drops because these professionals can do it so much more efficiently. So like, yes, in a world where if we were running a server in our basement versus, on Amazon, yes, the energy bill would be lower than our Amazon bill. But, having to pay people to manage that, having to, make sure our monitoring and everything is okay, and keep that all up. I mean, the simplifying things is all about just letting the professionals do their job. Like, you don't ask your designer to start writing back-end services.
How do you guys think about observability today?
Yeah, that's such an interesting topic with a distributed system, like how we operate our game servers. So we kind of have a mix of systems. A big thing is making sure we know that our servers are behaving themselves, I like to say. So the latency is low, and we can reliably say that the latency is low. So we have multiple systems to make sure that, if the compute nodes that are running the game servers are the point of failure, if Prometheus, which is an observability tool, happens to also be running on that node, and it's no longer reporting that we're getting low latencies because it went offline as well, we want to make sure that's something to have. So just a lot of different access from around the globe. Just checking from multiple regions, saying like, hey, are we getting expected latencies from our endpoints? Are we able to join WebSockets? Are we able to receive UDP traffic? And we centralize it. We centralize it, and we make it so we can filter it down by region, by lobby price, just giving us ultimate flexibility to, compare these different servers to each other and say, whoa, this server just had a huge spike in ping latency to its players. Very unexpected, and all the other servers in the same region did not, so there must be something going on with that specific instance versus like if the whole cluster gets high latency, then we know we're probably having an issue at a network level.
Yeah, I mean, what is observability in a distributed world? It's tried in a distributed database and kind of trying to really get down into transaction details across massive, huge geographies and ranges. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But like, Dan Carpenter, I love having to say like it's two Dans. It's really easy. So Dan, how do you think about like what are the vanilla services that are important for basically more generally? Like I think I want to come back to your stack, Dan, and kind of things you think are important. But what is it from your all point of view? Like what are the big components?
I mean, I think from our perspective, as I mentioned, we have most entrants into our business typically start with storage and game servers, although I think having a very specific networking strategy and being very deliberate up front about how you're connecting not only all your different regions, but if there is, other partners that you're working with on top of our platform, having self-healing is key as well.
Yeah.
And whether that is a server with us or a strategy with a partner to go through that to ensure that there isn't a failure is key. And then I think, security is job one. We're trying to do a better job, especially within games, about building a broader security portfolio, both to protect from external attacks, but also just intrusion and also prevention of data leakage too, which is extremely important, especially in a regulated industry. And so, we have a suite of security services available now, but we need to do a better job of kind of telling that story to how they relate, within the game space. And then I would say the last thing would be content delivery. We're thinking a lot about not only live asset streaming, but also potentially from a development perspective, long-term, what it looks like to do asset streaming of actually components of a game down to a developer workstation and having that be, a first-party managed function, which is something a lot of folks are dealing with in downloading large binaries and files and so forth. So those are all aspects that I think we hear from folks a lot that they need from us.
Well, it's interesting, Dan, because like I go to reInvent every year, and Werner gets up there, and it's Foo Fighters shirt and a lot of crazy.
He has quite a T-shirt collection.
Yeah, right. And there's 500 services on a slide. Do you guys just curate that for kind of game developers in a much better way? Is that what's going on right now? I mean, it seems like that's the approach, right?
Constructing more of those to tell a more concerted story within the game space, yes, is something that's part of our work today. But then also, as I mentioned before, we consider EC2, S3, RDS, et cetera, first-party AWS services, and also building more first-party services specific to games is something that we're really focused on. And there will be, within Werner's slide at reInvent next year, a game-specific section that is growing in size and breadth.
Right. Yeah, but it's right because it's the stack, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think everybody, I don't know, the conversations I usually have across anybody, any vertical or whatever, within gaming, within Finser, within anything, it's like, oh, what's the stack you're using? So how do you think about the stack, Dan? Like, what's the set of tools that you actually have to have?
Yeah, like I said, it's use the right tools for the right job.
Right.
So, I wouldn't try to run all of my real-time leaderboards out of Cockroach because, I'm just lighting up hotkeys, and that is just a nightmare, especially in a distributed scenario. So we use Cockroach. That is that's our golden state of record. If everything fails, we can always fall back to Cockroach to get time series data, to get leaderboards, to get player statistics. We can always fall back to Cockroach, and sort of everything around it serves as like a cache to Cockroach. So we use Redis for a lot of our real-time data. So if we're talking about the esports book, that's the the real-time changing value of the pool that you're betting on. That's running off Redis. When we're talking about the arcade, a lot of the features that we're working on now for real-time metrics for players are going to be streaming through Redis. And then we also, time series is another one you have to be very careful of in a distributed scenario. We use timescale for time series. It's very nice being able to speak Postgres across a lot of your services. So I'm a big fan of timescale. They do an awesome job. And we run all of our compute off of EKS. So we try to keep everything open source. So if we ever have scenarios where we have customers that want to run local versions of our services, but there's not an AWS region in that state, and maybe because of that deal, an outpost is cost prohibitive. We're able to use open source technologies and place it literally just on a cluster of servers,
right?
And run our Kubernetes there, run Cockroach there, run Timescale, run Redis. I mean, those are all fully open source projects that allow us to have that flexibility, but we still get all the advantages of the cloud.
Right.
We still get that super scalability. We still get those first class products that these cloud providers like yourselves are developing, and we kind of get the best of both worlds in that.
How many people do you have kind of as operators within the organization right now? Just kind of DevOps, SRE, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, so we have 3 people in the back end. We have 4 people in the front end, and then we have a designer, marketing, and then our CEO who manages
marketing's overhead, dude.
So we have a relatively small team, and for reference, we went from the idea of the Ultimate Arcade to releasing in 9 weeks. And that was because we were able to leverage the tools like Amazon and Cockroach because we knew how they worked. We knew they were the right tool for the job. And we could just say, all right, we know exactly what we have to make. Let's just start building it.
Yeah.
And just, 9 weeks later, we have streamers, creating clips on Twitch about our games.
I love hearing that. So yeah, but it's been a wonderful journey with y'all because yeah, I mean, thinking about the data is like the central system of record, and then there's a bunch of stuff around that consumes that, as opposed to having multiple different points of failure. I think a big deal. I think it comes out pretty well in your UI. So do you want to just show the UI and kind of just show what you guys are doing?
Sure, absolutely.
It's always, come on, man. It's not code, but at least it's something to look at. It's a little techie. So.
And I totally wish that I provided another screenshot as well that I'm thinking of now. But this is what our concept looks like for our third-party development panel. We want to reduce the amount of information that you see because we don't want to distract people from what's not important. So, right up top, we want to show you, hey, how well are you performing from a money perspective and a player popularity perspective. We also give you the flexibility to have multiple different games, and within those games, you can jump into revisions of games, so you can deploy certain revisions of game servers at certain percentages or to certain regions. And if there's any issues, we want to let you know very quickly. We keep all your logs for you, all your analytics. Basically, we just wanted to build a dashboard that allows you to focus on the games themselves and making games part of your income. Because ultimately that's what we want to do. We want to let game developers just be game developers.
Right.
We want to take away the complexity. It's very much how Amazon reduced the complexity of hosting services, how you guys are reducing the complexity of distributed data, how Stripe reduced the complexity of taking payments. We want to do the same thing for game developers. We just want to say, hey, just work on your game. We'll give you this really awesome dashboard that we're working on, and hope to get some feedback soon about it. And we'll give you just the tools that you need to be able to perform at peak efficiency.
Right. And so this is fairly static, Dan, like what we're showing. Is this all coming from, are you using Cockroach as system of record to feed this, or is it coming from multiple different places? Because I assume there's real-time stuff going on as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. This comes from multiple places. A lot of basically all the graphs that you see, that's all going to be aggregated from Timescale. All of the actual numbers that say hey, we are paying you out this much money, that's all coming from Cockroach because that's our golden state of record. It would be foolish to query anything else. And then we'll actually be having some real-time values coming through. That'll be through a combination of systems like Redis and Kafka and various other infrastructure. We combine it all and condense it into one spot. That just really makes it a seamless experience. So developers can quickly deploy revisions of their games. They can see how well they're doing. They can see the popularity. We have lots of other screens in the analytics and stuff that show you the breakdown of players by the region, the breakdown of your income by lobby price, just a lot of really insightful information so you can optimize your games for the players without constantly having to ask them for feedback.
Right on. Well, cool. If anybody, I'm going to shift into a little bit more kind of the database challenges. If anybody has any questions about this or anything else that Dan is building, God, by all means, please, I'm happy to take questions. So don't all jump at once.
I think actually you touched on something I neglected to mention, though, is mentioning Kubernetes management. We're certainly aware that not everything runs in AWS, but also self-managing Kubernetes can be a fairly hellish experience. And so I'm hoping that, from our managed Kubernetes service has been helpful, but was that easy and approachable to use in AWS, or is there improvements could be made there?
I think there are. And I'm also really excited about EKS Anywhere. I'm excited to try that out once we get some customers that refuse to let us be on the cloud. I think so. One thing I like to say, so I originally came from Google Cloud Platform. I did all my development there, and now I always move everything to AWS. And
we appreciate that.
And I would say Google has a rock star Kubernetes engine. I mean, they made it basically. And I think there are a lot of things that EKS does that I prefer over GKE, which is the Google Kubernetes engine. The only thing that it's only a problem once, because once you solve it, you just copy and paste it everywhere. But setting up that first cluster, we are kind of forced to turn every dial, whereas something like Google will have hey, this is a default get going right now. So if we're using something like the CDK, we have to configure all the node roles, all the IAM roles for the pods, all that kind of thing. Now that was a problem we only have to solve once, and we had solved that back in our esports book, so that was a copy paste into the arcade. But setting that up the first time, it's definitely a little tricky because you have to have a good understanding of AWS and a good understanding of Kubernetes, which is not a convergence that you see in too many people. So that is it's a growing understanding, but it's still pretty far and few between. So we'll have to get a lot of heads in there. And but it's only a problem you solve once, and it's something that we're working on, is making a lot of this stuff open source of how we've done this, because we think we do generally a pretty good job at like both security and infrastructure. That's something that we hope to validate with AWS as well. But making everything that we've done that we can share, shared. Because I think it makes so much sense to just share what you're doing. It just makes everyone better.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in the. I'm sorry to say this, Dan Carpenter, but it's like, it's Giphy is what we used to call it when I was at CoreOS, and we were driving the whole Kubernetes thing. It was Google infrastructure for everyone else. Yeah. But it's kind of true. Like if you look at what happened over the past 15 years of that company, like Lightstep for observability, Bazel doing dev and test production, like testing stuff, like, and so like these projects are getting out, and they're going to other places. And I tell you what, y'all make it real easy to consume it, Dan Carpenter. You know what I mean? So like y'all do your job really well, and I think I've used both, and it's like it's pretty simple, straightforward. So the funny thing is, I always think like Google does things like 90% of the way done. Sometimes like that last 10% you have to like Googlefy your brain or something to get it right. But really making those things simple and making those right choices, I think, is really, really critical. For us, it's like we got to run everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, and so for us, we built like serverless, we build like other things like that. It's like we want to run on everything. So how much of the decision?
I think someone had a question in there.
Oh, good, awesome. Oh, please. I'm sorry, it's hard to see, so sorry about that.
It's no problem. This dashboard's really cool, and I was just wondering how you decided on the two metrics, total captured revenue and total online players, and if there were any other metrics that you thought were important to developers that you are showing in a different view, or like that you cut for some reason.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is a story that we've gone through ourselves for the arcade with the game, the first game that we have launched and the games that were upcoming, and just digging through our analytics, figuring out what is the most meaningful to not only increasing the popularity, but also proving how successful the game is from a monetary standpoint. And we found that generally when you hit a home screen, you want like the simplest data. So we want to say like, hey, here's how much money you're making and here's how popular you are. If you want to dive into it, go ahead and jump into the analytics tab that you can see on the left there. And we basically have a pre-made dashboard that shows you a lot of really interesting stuff. So we have a sort of players section and a financial section. In the financial section, that's where we start breaking down like, hey, here's revenue by lobby price, because we encourage you to have 10 token lobby, 100 token lobby, and a token is basically worth 1 cent. So you have people who want to be the high rollers can play, and streamers love to run around in the $10 lobbies, but also having a free option for people who don't want to spend money but they still want to play your game. So we have a lot of breakdowns of like how much are you making by region, at what times are you making the most, so you can figure out where your games are most popular and when. And then we also have the same breakdowns for player counts and player statistics. Like in this region, what's your average, revenue per player? Are the Japanese player more profitable than the Mexican player, for example? And there's a lot of other really cool statistics that we're still working out. Like my favorite one is the return within 10 seconds. So my favorite statistic on our Mixpanel dashboard is that within 10 seconds of one player defeating another, there's a 97% chance that they rejoin another game. And that's a really important metric because it shows how sticky your games are. They don't just die and go, screw this, I don't want to play anymore. Because they died, they want to come back. Either they want to go kill the guy that killed them, or they want to try to earn all their money back, or they just love the game. So it's a lot of it we're still learning as we go through. Like I said, we only launched Friday, so we've had a limited amount of data. We've had like 43,000 different unique game sessions, but still a limited amount of data. So we're still learning what is most meaningful, and that's a process that'll also take a lot of feedback from our first third-party developers that we work with. But yeah, a lot of it is just around how sticky are your players and how profitable is your game.
I had a follow-up question.
Sure.
Have you thought about, or I guess is it like custom analytics? Like, do you anticipate users coming in with requests for, well, I want to see this data, and allowing that sort of like allow people to build their own dashboards, or are you planning on just giving them what you've decided what your top users think is the most important?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, when we started making this dashboard, that was the first question I got from the people who work on analytics within our team is like, are people going to be able to customize these dashboards? And it was like, I think to start, no, because I think it's fair to say that people just getting into the multiplayer space don't know what analytics are the most important yet. And we're just basing that off of us. Like, we didn't know what was most important until we started analyzing everything in so many different ways. And we said, wow, that is a really good indicator of revenue for the next 3 days. So I think when we launch, we'll try to just keep it as simple and allow the game devs to just focus on their game. But yes, that is a very big epic we have in Jira, which is customizable dashboards, because we think it's only fair to let developers be able to explore the information about their games to whatever extent they want to. Because part of our offering is that we're collecting that data for them. It's their data. We should let them have unlimited access to it, basically. So however you want to break it down, if you want to export it to some file format and parse it with Python, or if you want to make link Grafana and bring it into your other dashboards, or if you just want to customize the graphs that you see on our dashboard, I think it's a very big goal of us to give that ultimate flexibility, because it's your information. You should be able to do anything that you want to do with it. Thank you.
I think there's just a wealth of open source tools that if you give people access to data, funny enough, you're going to learn a whole hell of a lot.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, as a company, like at Cockroach, it was funny. We, Cockroach is a distributed database. So we have nodes that are all over the planet. And it's interesting. We have to measure latencies between different locations, like from, say, Virginia to Oregon, because of the two different data centers. And that latency actually fluctuates from time to time. And people were having problems with queries early on with our database. And it was funny, they were complaining. We're like, oh, well, we didn't know how to expose it. And we just basically started exposing the data to people. And we learned how to actually visualize it for people. So, I think the more open you are with those sort of things, you just learn so much from the masses as opposed to the one, right? So
I'm sure our default dashboards will change once we start giving the people flexibility to make their own, because we'll say, wow, this developer just figured out a way better metric than we ever thought of.
Right.
And we want to make that the first thing you see when you land on our dashboard now.
Yeah.
So
I just think it comes back to that whole being open about the way that you've solved things, I think is the lesson across everything I've learned in my career over the last 10 to 15 years. I love open source. So putting it out there, it allows everybody to kind of build on it. And that's the whole Kubernetes community. I think one of the reasons it's so successful is there's a community of people who are actually trying to figure the thing out. It's easy to figure out. No, it's not, right? So I think that's one of those things. So Dan, you and I, again, yesterday sat in a booth, and Dan, graciously is talking to people about CockroachDB as I'm standing there. What is CockroachDB?
Yeah, I think that's a question I get from both my parents
right.
and
the
a question
name,
I get from my developers.
Yeah, right.
So there's a different explanation for every class of technical understanding, but I think what I like to say, I think it's a database that solves the database problem. Yeah. It is a database that allows you to have the consistency that you expect out of something like Postgres, but also the scale that you might expect out of something like Cassandra. You're kind of getting the best of everything in the database while also making it super efficient, and it's open source, and the backing company is amazing. It's just such a great combination. And I think Cockroach is a really feature-full database, is what I like to call it. I think the only one that kind of comes close to being feature-full is Mongo, but Mongo solves a different problem, I guess we can say.
But it does. So. It solves a different problem, right? And I think that's the funny thing. My friend Tim's in the crowd. We have these conversations all the time with people. It's well, can I just use Mongo to do that? I'm like, well, do you have any sort of consistency requirements of your data? Is this what's the workload? And so I always ask people, what's your workload? Because I tell you what, Mongo's a pretty damn great database in itself, and it's pretty feature rich, and they've been building for a long time. But if you want something that's relational, you enjoy referential integrity, and you want to do joins, and you live in that kind of the relational kind of Postgres world, that's where you're going to choose this database, right?
I think Cockroach gives you choices too,
right,
because it's distributed, and you can play very distributed. You can be very here's where the technical comes in. You can have very high cardinality keys. You can be everywhere. You can be very careful with where you place data. But, if you want to at the same time, it's Postgres wire compatible. So I can still do, Postgres stuff. And I don't have to think about, hey, am I choosing the right transaction consistency? Am I choosing isolation? Am I tuning all these things? Cockroach has like amazing defaults. And the great thing is because it's, Postgres, so many existing tooling like client libraries, CLI tools. We use a great one called SQL-C that basically compiles SQL queries to Golang functions. All that stuff works on Cockroach.
Yeah.
And so we can take this amazing community that's been around for, I think Postgres came out in the 80s initially.
86.
Yeah, something like that. And, we can use all that tooling for this, completely new system that basically redefines the way you think about databases. What's also great about Cockroach is you can run it at small scale. You can run it with like half a core and just on your machine in Docker. So you can develop with the exact same system that you could be running 300 nodes with. And it's just the exact same. You don't have to worry about, complex setups. I think it's the database with the most flexibility. I can choose to be consistent. I can choose to do a really fast, inconsistent read. I can choose if I want to have my data all centralized, the golden records in one place, or if I want to, be very mindful about my latency, which we do, and we want to say, hey, wherever the data was created around the world, let's store the consistent copy of, to not use too complex terms, the golden record of that row. Let's store that where the data was created, so that like, hey, all the people playing in India, they don't have to talk to America to move their money. I'm just gonna, because all the golden records of that data is in India, I could just, move the money in the database in India, and then the replicas around the world will take care of it. So,
Right.
Yeah, it gives you the most flexibility, but also doesn't force complexity on you.
Yeah, and and what Dan is describing is like single logical database across multiple different regions, across multiple different AZs. It could be 3 laptops on a table. Ask any one of the nodes ask any one of them. They're all endpoints.
Yeah.
And they can find that data no matter where you're at within the context of the entire single logical database. It's not a simple concept though to get at first, right, Dan? I mean, you come from more of a distributed systems world. Yeah. If people are trying to figure out kind of what a distributed database means to them, how do you typically kind of help people start to go down that path?
Yeah, and there's 2 really popular ways to do it. There's basically you think about partitioning your data. How do you chop up your data in such a way where you can move it to the places that are the most efficient to stick that data? That's kind of the general consensus of distributed systems in general. But there's 2 really popular forms of doing that: hash-based partitioning and range-based. And Cockroach is by default range-based. And the way I think about it, and I explain it to people, is you have, your database table. It's a list of rows. They have some primary key, that's some string. Maybe it's a user ID, maybe it's a slip ID, maybe it's a game session ID, whatever. And you basically say, hey, I'm actually going to split this in 2 or many other pieces. And I'm going to actually move this piece to another node and say, hey, node, you are responsible for the golden record of this piece, by the way. And of course, you have multiple replicas of that to make sure that you're resilient to failure. But you basically take part of that data and move it to another node while still keeping a single logical database. You can do the same thing with Postgres if you want to have 5 people managing your 8
Well, and you're
cluster.
going to be sharding a database, and it's going to take thousands of people.
You lose the consistency between the shards and
Yeah.
Implementing custom 2-phase commit, and it's just a whole nightmare scenario that Cockroach is like, yep, just literally. And so another thing that I don't think I say often enough that I like about Cockroach is how easy it is to actually manage, even if you're running it yourself. You think about other things like a custom sharded, relational database like MySQL or Postgres, or if you even look at things like Cassandra and Scylla, which are the other big distributed systems, you have to run additional, managers on top of that to do all sorts of cleanup work that you might have to do manually, and you have to, oh my gosh, the amount of work you have to do. You have to install software just to add observability. You have to add another observability operator. It's like that's just like by default in Cockroach.
Well, I always laugh. Like honestly, y'all, I think the pandemic would have been horrible if nobody had ever invented Cassandra. Like, you guys understand, like, Netflix, Apple TV, HBO, all that stuff. It's like so much of that stuff is in Cassandra. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, you need a PhD in Cassandra to actually make it work really well. And it's an amazing tool.
It took a long time to figure it out.
It is awesome. Yeah, but it's It's the right database for the right workload. And I think the shortcut for me when I think about a distributed database, we used to think in just the logical model, right? We think about tables and how they relate to each other, and like, remember those big diagrams you would have about, the logical model of your data. You have to think about the physical location of your data, because there's two things you have to do. You either have to survive a failure. So how do you survive the failure of an entire region? Or for us, we can survive the failure of an entire cloud provider. We could have a single logical database spanning multiple different cloud providers across different parts of the world, right? Sorry, Dan, but we do that. But hey, man, you're always one of the choices. What you want to survive, but it's also this latency. How do I, as Dan said, how do you make data, how do you let the database deal with where data lives, right? And that's what these kind of databases can do. So that's my one commercial. So I know we weaved a little bit of Cockroach in there throughout. So just to kind of wrap up the whole conversation, I don't know, what's your, Dan Carpenter, I'll start with you. What's your big idea walking away? I guess, just in game tech in general, or what you learn today, I don't know, like, I bet on somebody in March Madness, I don't know.
I think the number one big idea I've taken away from GDC is everyone wants to talk about the metaverse, but no one actually knows what that word actually means. That's from a humorous perspective, but I think for us, I think the really big takeaway of this week is that we need to make the platform more approachable and easy to use for, as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, for folks of all sizes that are coming to us for the first time. And I think managed services is that gate that we're gonna work very diligently on improving. But if I could echo Werner, when you called out earlier, I mean, I think my message to the audience too is, go build. We have a ton of credit programs available. We want to make sure that it's accessible financially and from a service perspective. And so I have an entire team dedicated to the game space that's ready and available to help anyone in the room who wants to look at AWS, hopefully for the first time, or grow your usage of it. Yeah. So certainly appreciate it.
Yeah. Dan Goodman?
I think I think something that was pretty much the goal of Arcade is like, let's just let's keep within our lanes. Let's use the right tool for the right job. Let's let game developers focus on being game developers, and let's build solutions that make that more of a reality. Game developers are really good at making games. I was not a game developer, and as I had to start getting into game development to build the Arcade, wow, I have a very large respect for you guys. It is a very complex system, and I think they're really good at that. So let's not distract them with infrastructure. Let's use the right tools for the right job. Let's use the right cloud providers. Let's use the right databases. Let's use the things that give us the opportunity to be small, but also go really big, both up and out. Think about what you're doing up front so you can prepare yourselves. There's Reid Hoffman, famously says, in order to scale, you have to start by doing things that don't scale. I think you can think a little bit about it up front and say, hey, let's not use JSON flat files in my game server because that's easier. Let's think about what database, what infrastructure we're using so that when we do scale, it's not an entire rewrite. So think about using the right tool for the right job. And I think that's Cockroach for us has been the right tool for the right job in a lot of situations.
Man, you guys are killing me. You guys both chose the same thing, and that's mine. Use the right tool for the right job and be curious about the tools that are out there, because not all of them, marketers are overhead, but marketers also sell a lot. Be curious and use them. Get your hands dirty, use them, see how they're applicable, talk to your peers, because there is a world of tools that will allow you to focus on what you do well. And I think that's such a key piece. That's why I work where I work. I think we take a lot of the overhead from people, and to me, it's we like to do that. You like to do what you do. Dan Carpenter, you know what I mean? And so together we can actually build something together. So I think that's the key thing. It's a community of people. So are there any other questions before we wrap up? Anybody else? I did appreciate the questions. So. All right, was this helpful at all? I hope everybody, this was at least a little bit helpful. So we certainly enjoyed ourselves. Dan and Dan. Thank you so much, boys. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time, showing up at 9 a.m. for this. Enjoy the rest of the day, the keynotes and everything. So thank you very much.